For today's tutorial, we're going to be making scrunchies. Scrunchies are a lot of fun. They're quick, they're easy, and they don't take a lot of fabric. The pattern I'm going to show you today has an optional tie that's removable, so you can have the tie or not, and it's also fun to make coordinating colors so you can mix and match and swap the ties as you like. One of my favorite parts of making scrunchies is choosing the fabrics. There are so many different fabrics you can choose from. The fabrics I have today are cotton, a velvet-like fabric, and satin. The first thing you'll want to do when making your scrunchie is to cut out a long, skinny rectangle. The rectangle I'm using today is 3.5 inches tall by 18 inches wide. Anywhere from 3 to 4 inches tall works great, and anywhere from about 17 to 20 inches in length will make a good scrunchie. If you'd like to make the tie for your scrunchie, go ahead and print out the free pattern from my website and cut out 2 tie pieces from your fabric. Once you have your pieces cut out and you're ready to begin sewing, you want to determine how you're going to close your scrunchie. We're going to sew the long edge on the sewing machine, but the short edges, when we sew that part of our scrunchie, we have a couple options. We can either sew it by hand or by machine. I'm going to show you both ways. So the first way I'm going to show you is if you are sewing by machine. If you'd like to sew your scrunchie closed on the machine, let's mark our guideline. On one of the short ends of the rectangle, on the right side of the fabric, draw a line 1/2 inch from the edge. This will give us a good guide mark for later. On the other end, turn your fabric over so that it's right side down, and this time mark 1 inch from the short end. We're then going to go to the ironing board and press this end under. So take your raw edge and fold it to touch your guideline and press. Now, depending on the type of fabric you're using, you may need to change your iron setting. So if you're using satin or velvet or another type of specialty fabric, always test your fabric first before pressing your project. I now have one end of my rectangle that has been folded to the wrong side, and the other end of the rectangle has a 1/2 inch guide mark. Gently open up the fold and take your rectangle and fold it in half so that the right sides are touching. You can pin or clip in place if you like, and we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along the long edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next, we're going to turn this tube right side out. You can use hemostats to turn if you have it, or just turn by hand. I'm going to use a wooden spoon to help me today. A few inches from the end, I'm going to grab my fabric and I'm going to separate it so that it's not touching, and then I'm going to use my thumbs to push it in. This kind of creates a little pocket in the fabric. I'm then going to take my wooden spoon and I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm going to slide the rectangle over the end of the wooden spoon. I'm just going to work it gently down, and then until it starts to slide freely. Then grip the end, remove the spoon, and slide your fabric out. And then those last few inches you can usually just pull out with your finger. And now our scrunchie's right side out. This was the end that I ironed previously. So I'm going to tuck in the fabric at this end 1/2 inch so that it lays right where I pressed it before. and I'm going to give it a good finger press to hold that fold in place. The next thing we need for our scrunchie is some elastic. So you can cut a 6 to 8 inch piece of elastic for your scrunchie. The piece I'm using right now is 7 inches long, and I'm going to thread my elastic through my fabric tube. So I'm going to take a safety pin and poke it through the end of my elastic and close the safety pin. And I'm going to slide it through one end of my fabric tube. And in my right hand, I'm going to hold on to the end of this elastic. I don't want to lose it. And then I'm going to feel the safety pin that's inside the fabric, and I'm going to scrunch the fabric tube along that safety pin. I can still feel it in here. And then I'm going to let it go and slide, still gripping the safety pin. So again, scrunch the fabric on the safety pin. Hold on to the safety pin and slide the fabric. And do that until you get to the end. Once you have both ends of your elastic, go ahead and hold on to those and remove the safety pin. And the next thing we're going to do is sew our elastic together. So take your elastic and overlap it about 1/2 inch and pin in place. And now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this in place. And I want to make sure I sew it really well. So I'm going to do a few rows of stitches to hold it in place. A zigzag stitch works really good for this. Whatever stitch you use, you want to make sure it's really strong so that your elastic doesn't come undone. And you want to make sure that you back stitch well to create a good knot. Slide the fabric out of the way and place the elastic under the presser foot. I find it helps to always start with the needle down. Now that our elastic's in place, we're going to hook our fabric together. So we have our end that's been folded in, and we have our end that has the raw edges. Take the end of the fabric that has the raw edges and place it inside the end that's been turned down. Once you've tucked the raw edge into the folded edge, check to make sure that it lays flat. Make sure the elastic is towards the inside of the loop. Make sure that the folded edge of the fabric aligns with the guideline that you drew at the beginning. Now you can slip stitch this in place all the way around if you like, but this one we're going to sew on the machine. So on the folded side, we're going to sew with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance down this edge, securing the fabric in place. We now have a scrunchie, and this scrunchie has been sewn together on the machine. If you know in advance that you want to slip stitch your scrunchie closed, here's what you can do. When you start making your scrunchie, when you prepare the two ends, turn it right side down, and as before, mark the edge 1 inch away. And press the end to the guide mark. This will give you a nice fold to slip stitch on. Do the exact same thing on the other end. Next, gently open the folds, turn it right side together, and stitch the long end just as before. You're also going to insert the elastic just as before. Once you've inserted the elastic, go ahead and tuck the ends of the fabric under to your fold. Do so on both sides. You can clip it in place if you need to. Then what you're going to do is align the seams. So here's my seam on this end. Here's my seam on this end. I'm going to align those two at the folds, and I'm going to slip stitch around. So starting from the inside of my seam, I'm going to sew from one fold to the other with a slip stitch. Tie your knot. And tied your knot, slide your needle back through the seam next to your knot and out through the fabric of your scrunchie and pull and clip. And that will hide your thread tails. The advantage to the slip stitch is that it allows the fabric to remain puffy and your elastic can move more freely. If you'd like to make the tie for your scrunchie, you need 2 fabric pieces for the tie. You want to take your fabric pieces and place them right sides together on top of each other. And we're going to stitch around the edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But we do want to leave an opening, so you can use your pattern piece as a guide. I'm going to leave this section here open to turn my tie. So I'm going to begin at this mark, sew all the way around and stop at this mark. And again, I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that I've stitched around the edges, I'm going to go ahead and clip the curve so that it turns and lays flat. I am not going to clip the section of my opening, but I will clip everywhere else. Pinking shears work great for this if you have them. If you don't have pinking shears, you can use regular scissors. Just take care to clip all those curved sections. Turn the tie right side out. And use a turning tool to make sure all corners and edges are fully turned. And make sure the opening is tucked in so it looks like it's been sewn. And then press flat. Our next step is to close the opening. You can slip stitch this closed, or you can close it on the machine using about a 1/16 inch of a seam allowance, so really narrow. The last step is to add our tie to our scrunchie. If I've sewn my scrunchie by machine, I like to put the tie right in that location to hide the stitches. Simply slide the tie through the loop and tie the ends together. Pull it good and snug. And you now have a tie on your scrunchie. The satin scrunchies are very nice, but they can be a little bit more challenging than some of the other fabrics. Since the fabric is slick, it does slide around a bit, so you may want to use more pins than you would for other fabrics, and take more care when turning and pressing, because you will notice quite a bit of fraying in a lot of satin fabrics. You can add or remove the ties as you like, and you can even swap them scrunchie to scrunchie if you want to mix and match. I hope you you've enjoyed this tutorial. Happy sewing!